Here we are, Real Recovery Talk. I am your host, Tom Conrad. We have over here Benjamin B.
What's happening, everyone?
Ben, you need to speak up.
New mic, getting used to it.
Yeah, we got some new mics over here. We just got two new mics. Eric is still on the old Audio Technica 2100. It's an old mic, but works perfectly fine.
Yeah, still a good one, right?
Yeah, still a good mic. Anyways, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching on YouTube. If in fact this video or this podcast does add value to you, please share it with somebody that you feel could benefit from watching the video or listening to us for the next, 30, 45 minutes. In the end, if you want to reach out to either myself or Ben, you can email us, tom@realrecoverytalk.com and ben@realrecoverytalk.com. And chances are we will ask you for your phone number so we could facilitate some sort of conversation with you over the phone. Email is good, but it's hard to have a conversation over email. I'm actually considering, and I don't know if I've put this out public. I have with my friends, but I'm thinking about writing a book. That book is going to be titled, Don't Email Me. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't email me, of course. It just means that it's hard to have conversation and communication via email and text messaging and stuff like that. Do you guys agree?
Totally. I mean, addiction, the stuff that we're talking about, is not black and white. Every situation's so different. It's hard. You can't possibly respond in a proper manner.
Yeah, so...
And the way I see that, as far as like for what I do, whenever somebody's texting or emailing, they're just looking for an easy out. They're looking for an easy way to end the conversation where I can just turn my phone over and all of a sudden it's much harder to hang up the phone with another live human being than it is to just say, "K," or "Thank you for your time."
Right.
It's an easy out in my opinion.
Well, you can't portray any sort of emotion. You can't actually say what you want to say. Like, my mode of delivery when talking to somebody is very animated, and it needs to come across in a way that I need to either be on the phone with you or be face to face with you. And you just can't do that via email and text messages. I don't think. I think it's not a waste of time, but anyways, Eric, thank you for coming on. I think a good thing for us to discuss, obviously, we want to get more into your story and kind of what your journey's been like over the past 4 years. And I want to give you an opportunity to, just share a little bit about like what it was like for you growing up. When did you get introduced into drugs and alcohol, stuff like that? And then, we'll steer the conversation and kind of see where things go from there. But I think there's a lot of certain points that we're probably going to end up touching on through conversation. So anyways, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you guys. My name's Eric Bowler. I'm an alcoholic. I'm here live with Tom and Ben, who they're two mentors of mine. Been around through my entire recovery journey. As far as like what it starts out for me, I was born in a small town named Statesboro, Georgia, home of the Georgia Southern Eagles. Kind of come from a mixed bag, so to say. When I think about childhood for me, I definitely think about moving. Different homes, different places, different states. As far as to keep everything on track for the most part, and the topic of recovery, when I look at it, from K to 12, I went to 17 different school districts. I would transfer all the time. I went from biological mother, biological father, stepmom, cousins, friends, families, hotel rooms. We lived in a car for a little bit, a lot of emotional, physical abuse. In 7th grade, I called my grandmother. I had found a saucer with flour on it and a cut up McDonald's straw, in our house when I lived with my mother, my biological mother. And I called Granny and I said, "What is this? I don't know what this is." And she said, "Sweetheart, you need to put that back right now." And that's just a snippet of what my childhood was like for the most part. Uncontrolled mental health and uncontrolled alcoholism through like these parental figures that I had, for a large part of my life. Myself, I started, dabbling in, different substances to be cool, to fit in, skipping school. When I was in 6th and 7th grade, I would sneak out of the back window, go down the staircase, and go and smoke weed and skateboard with my friends in Manheim, Pennsylvania. When I lived with my biological mother, her boyfriend, his son, his pregnant girlfriend, and some of their other kids. It was really just a toxic environment. But that was my first, the first open door to escape that I found, whether it be free roam with no responsibility of a control on my life where I could escape and go smoke weed and, vandalize things and just really be like an uncontrolled kid. Little did I know I had, brewing chronic mental health conditions and untreated alcoholism at a very young age. And that just developed and it grew and it snowballed. Fast forward a little bit, moved to South Carolina with my biological father and his wife, our girlfriend at the time, and got introduced to some cousins who were a little bit older than me. I, went to their parties and I, got trucks stuck in the mud and did the country thing, chewed tobacco, drank beer, partied at, people's houses and, did the country thing where I wore Carhartt pants and rode a 4-wheeler and, it was just a totally different way of life. And transferred 5 times my freshman year, ended up living with my aunt. I lived back with my dad. And then I ended up moving to Georgia with my biological mother for a week, went to that high school. And then we got kicked out of her boyfriend's house. And at that point, I had a friend of mine. His name is Eric. I consider him a brother to this day. We were friends. We met in kindergarten. I had, lived with him during the summers and stuff. And his mom always told me, she said, "Sweetheart, if you ever need some place to go, here's my number. Call me." So I did. My biological mother was laying on the couch crying. We had no place to go and we had 24 hours to get out. So she drove about an hour and a half when she got off work, 7 miles down a dirt road, 1 mile down a driveway to the bank of the Ogeechee River in a town called Egypt, Georgia, where she took all of our trash bags. That was what we had our stuff in. And she dropped my mother, Lisa, at a hotel, and she took me back to her house. And she says, "You're not going back there." Couple of days later, this happened to be spring break of my 9th grade year in high school. We get into that and, all the while, crazy households, I'm being shuffled around. I don't have any stability and I'm drinking whatever I can find, escaping, negative relationships, no structure, staying up till 3 a.m, doing what I want in school, all while making straight A's. I have you. And I actually, the conversation came up of, legal guardianship of my friend's parents to take me. So one of the lowest moments that I ever have, when I think about my childhood coming up, I actually gave my mother, Lisa, a $100 bill to sign me over, to sign her parental rights over to my friend's family. And I gave her that in their driveway, and they went to the courthouse and signed me over. So I paid for another family to have legal guardianship of me. And, stayed there for 3 years, in their house. I was, partying every weekend, drinking, active addiction, things like that. But I thought I was just being a kid. I didn't think about, I thought that was being normal, being cool, throwing parties and, being part of the clique and, first time being able to play sports my sophomore year of high school. And I really latched hold to the party lifestyle. That led into, wanting to get a fake ID. And I was living in Pembroke, Georgia, which is 20 miles from Statesboro, Georgia, which has Georgia Southern University. The town maybe has 20,000 people. The college has 30,000. It's a college town. Lots of parties, Greek row, anything you want, you name it. So I would use my fake ID and get into the bars and clubs. At 17 years old, I thought that was fun. Got accepted into college my senior year of high school. And, moved out, got my own apartment, and things went crazy. Things were really out of hand. In this period of time, I got my first legitimate job at Belk. And that's when I ran into a lady today named Christy that I call my mother, that she identified in me, like she saw a lost kid and she saw herself, and her and her family swooped me in and took me in and showed me they loved me till I could love myself. That was 10 years ago. In those 10 years, what they had to deal with were the consequences of my biological parents. While we say I know what makes me an alcoholic is a physical allergy that's followed by a phenomenon of craving. That's outlined in every edition of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I know that today. But what we also have to factor in is, chronic mental health conditions, behavioral issues, childhood trauma, things like that. All that's a huge factor. What they call now a dual diagnosis program. I fit the mold to a T. And I've done my stay in, psych stabilization units. Being unstable, being suicidal. I had this pattern where, each day of the week there was an event in town, at a bar, at a frat house, at a friend's house, whether it was Time Bomb Tuesdays where we smoked weed and did a bunch of crazy stuff in somebody's house, Thirsty Thursdays, $5 Bomb Fridays, Wild Wednesdays. All these stupid things, I felt like I needed to be there, and I was going to be the most intoxicated person there. That's what my alcoholism led me to. And that was, I've been arrested 13 times. I was kicked out of Georgia Southern University within a month. 2 months. I got kicked out on Halloween of 2012. An administrative in treatment, we would call that an admin DC. In college, administrative withdrawal is what they counted it as. I had violated the code of conduct too many times, where I got arrested for underage drinking, giving false information, a laundry list of things. And I thought I was fine. That's what kids do. Little did I know, I wasn't provided with any type of formal education of what addiction or chronic alcoholism was. I didn't know that's what was going on with me. I had not been exposed, so to say, to reality of what was going on with myself. In Bullitt County, Georgia, when I got in trouble, my lawyer made a deal with the prosecutor, and I attended a 12-week IOP is what they called it. I went to a church service that was held in the old police department 3 times a week. That was my treatment. That was what they do to when you have a 18-year-old kid who's been arrested who knows how many times in college. That's what you do to them. That's your clinical recommendation. They don't have any basis or really any right to say that. That's not how we should guide people to a better path. But that's our system. That's a whole nother podcast. But stick to my story. I did anything to evade the law. And all that snowballed. I would, be transitional, live in my own house, in and out of my parents' house, formal counseling and medication management for bipolar disorder and depression and PTSD and all these things. You mix that with daily drinking and cocaine and methamphetamine use. Are you gaining anything, or are you just like perpetuating misery? That was the crux of where I was stuck. I didn't know where I was going. But to kind of catapult us into like what led me to where I am today, I was living with a guy. He was a UPS driver. Only way I knew him was from the bar. We partied and bought drugs together. I went on this phase of doing a lot of DMT and daily drinking, which led me to my demise. Kind of like my burning bush moment. I went missing for 2 days. And I got pulled over at 5:00 in the morning, and for DUI, I was running 110 and a 50. I don't even know how many charges I got. I had, a slew of drugs, and I had been drinking solid for 2 days without stopping. I don't remember much of the exchange, but I do remember waking up in the holding cell. Right when they pulled me over, I didn't blow. I told him that wasn't a good idea. I remember that conversation. They took me away, and they called my mom, because that was the only number I could remember. And it's raining. My dad gets the call. He said, "Christy, get up. Eric's in trouble." And my dad's like a, typical Southern man, rough around the edges, but with a heart of gold. And they come out to the side of the road at 5:00 in the morning, and the officer tells my mom, she said, "You got to get your boy some help." He said, "He's not a criminal, he's sick." And that's hard. They took me in when I was 18 years old, and they're, reaping the consequences of someone else's actions. At 24 years old, I'm shot, but they bail me out as usual. But this time I'm faced with 36 months, incarceration. We had a conversation about the Jones and Son funeral home, picking out caskets, or if I was going to be cremated, or treatment. So I chose to go to Florida for treatment. I started my journey off in a detox residential program. I had no intention on really staying sober. My intention was to not go to jail. But I was beaten down far enough to where I was willing to listen. I was willing to get out of my own way. And I did everything that was recommended. I had presence and treatment letters. I had clinical progress notes. I had letters from my clinical director at each facility that I went to. I did detox, residential PHP, and IOP at the first facility. When I got close to discharge, I had heard where a couple of people were going to rock. I didn't know what that was, but I know that I didn't have a job. I didn't have any money. I didn't have a vehicle that wasn't damaged, that I didn't crash. I didn't have a way to support myself. I wasn't employable. I needed total rehabilitation. And so luckily I had insurance at the time, and that floated the boat to where I have enough diagnosis codes to where they build enough criteria to where I would be covered. And that's how I ended up downstairs of the building we're actually in right now. And I was here at Rock for IOP through sober living. I followed all clinical recommendations. I had bright ideas to move out on my own when I built enough money, called my lawyer, pitched it to him. He said, Eric, your best possible outcome for your charges is that you stay in something owned by a treatment facility for as long as you can. I know it's hard, but the Lord will provide. He's a real Christian man. And I did. I stopped fighting it. I stopped doing it my way. And along this journey, in December of 2018, mind you, I got sober September 27th of 2018. Come December, when I have a little bit more freedoms in the level of care I was in, I picked up a sponsor. It was actually, I walked out of a therapy session, and my therapist tagged Ben in the hallway, and she's like, Ben, Eric needs a sponsor. Do you have anybody? Do you know anybody who's working a good program? And at the time, Ben just gave me this number. He said, call this dude, tell him he's your sponsor now. Happened to be one of Ben's sponsees. Did the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Completed the recommendations. I read with another man, page by page, word by word. I didn't skip any steps. I didn't get in the way. I took another man's advice. I showed up every Sunday morning with donuts and coffee to his apartment, and we read and we did the step work. All along the way, I was working in sales. I worked in a Google call room. We weren't really Google, but we sure told people we were. Oh, God.
Those are always fun.
Yeah, but what it provided for me, I paid off $20,000 worth of credit card debt in the first year of sobriety. Living in a halfway house and working 9 to 5 in a Google call room. And, as I grew more and more in AA and really developed like a foundation of morals, values, ethics, principles, what it says in the book to recreate a new way of life. As that was building traction in my psyche, an entire psychic change, I said, I want to work in treatment. I want to help people. I don't want to sell people stuff they don't need. I've sold cars, clothes, furniture, insurance, just sickening, to be in sales. For me personally, I just can't do it anymore. So a buddy of mine was an operations manager at a detox. So I was like, hey man, I've got 1 year sober, can I start working in treatment? Show up Monday morning, Social Security card, this. No real interview. He knew me. He was at my 1 year anniversary dinner. Started working in treatment. I've been in a treatment center as facility staff through, inclement weather, every number on the clock, AM and PM. I've worked overnights. I've done everything there is to do on an operations staff. I've drove across the state of Florida to pick somebody up. I've done the ins and outs, bag searches, psych stabilizations, Baker Acts, police in the hallway, having to separate, census when we have a girl in a meth psychosis running around and we're waiting for police to get there. Like all the crazy stories you might hear about treatment, I've experienced that, people seizing in the hallway, having to revive people, like the dark stuff that, doesn't always get highlighted about what addiction will bring to people. Kind of made my way through that. Then got me personally, I was taking this stuff home a little. My transference with clients and trying to help them more than my capacity. I don't have a license, I'm not a clinician. That's not my role currently. And that wasn't my role as a tech staff either. But I said, I want to do something. I still want to work in treatment, but I want to help people differently. So, a little shuffle around with different agencies, but I landed where I work now as an admissions coordinator in Banyan Treatment Centers, and couldn't be happier with the position that I do. And like the impact and like the moral foundation of what we work on. One of my mentors, he's actually, I don't know, second or third great grand sponsor to me. He says you have to align yourself morally with the agency that you work with. And what he meant by that was, I'm not working at a facility that promotes marijuana maintenance or, the MAP program or like all these different things. Like the philosophy of recovery that I stand by and see to be true is, based around a 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's not to say that's the only way for recovery, but personally, with my experience, that's what I see work. I see people that come from all these other different philosophies and they fall into the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous. Just because I'm in the rooms a lot, I see that a lot. But where it transitions me today, I'm contracted to build a house. I'm engaged. Currently, like I'm waiting to break ground on a house. I'm planning a wedding. I'm engaged. I just petitioned to graduate with my bachelor's degree from SNHU. I major in human services with a concentration in addiction studies. So it gives me like an academic variety of this industry and this field. I have, a foundation of practical experience and, 12-step calls and speaking to family, actually working in the field is great. But having like that academic background really puts things into perspective whenever you're taking a pharmacology class and you're like, it's science. There's so much more to this than what than meets the eye for your average Joe. And what it boils down to is like, the three of us sitting in a room. It's our job as a human service professional, which is what we are. To educate families and clients. It's not necessarily our job to like change the world, because we can't save them all. That's something I learned very early on in the rooms. But the impact we can make is grand, through, different agencies we work with and like the day in grind. But I mean, for me, it boils down to a lot of education about it. Because if you know and you get it, it's harder to go against it. Like it's just a lot harder from my experience. But that's kind of where I'm at today. I was revived from a hopeless state of, mind and being. I'm, I guess a white chip wonder is what they call, some people that don't have a chronic relapse. Like I'm not a chronic relapser. I picked up a white chip at the Oasis Club in North Palm Beach. And I also picked up a 4-year medallion in the same room. So that's kind of like my story, specifically. And I'll kind of like turn the table for you guys if you guys have any questions or anything like that.
Yeah, for sure. I think that there's obviously a lot there, and without going, way into the past, I think that what you have overcome over the years is, what I heard is a lot of kind of tossed around back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And for, families and loved ones of people that can relate to a certain degree, this is a lot of times what we see when it comes to addiction is there's no real consistencies in somebody's life. And I think you just did a really good job at it showing that from a firsthand perspective of what that's like, going to, multiple families and finding somewhere where you can fit in only to find yourself somewhere else a couple years later, so on and so forth. And it's this perpetual just cycle of doing the same thing over and over again. I guess, well, Ben, let me open it up to you. Do you have any comments or questions? I have some.
I do too. Yeah, there was so much there. I think one of the main points that jumped out to me, one of the first things that I heard, and Tom always says this on our podcast, we get a lot of family members who have a loved one in addiction or whatever. And one of the comments I get a lot on the phone calls that we get is, oh, do you have clients there that are just there to get out of their court orders and they're just trying to avoid jail? And I always try to hit home the point that it doesn't matter what gets you here, because it sounds like regardless, Eric showed up to treatment with one intention, but there's a saying in the rooms, a head full of AA and a belly full of booze don't mix. And he was referencing later, getting more knowledge, hence the going to school for this stuff with the addictions and the bachelor's degree. At some point, you had a change in heart. Like, was that an instant thing, or was it gradual, or did it just happen unexpectedly? Like, what? Break that down.
So as far as the change, I would say I had slow, gradual process. I welcomed change because I knew what I was doing was not working, but I certainly did not have a burning bush moment where I woke up one day and I was like, well, this is it. I'm going to change my life. I'm going to do this. It was much slower for me. Some people get back, experience the promises and things all of a sudden. But for me, it was probably about within the 6 to 8 month mark of sobriety, I realized I was in this thing for the long term. But up to that point, I was simply in it to save my skin.
I think we see that a lot, and that's why I tell people all the time, I don't necessarily care how you get here, so as long as you get here. Now, when you get here, there is a level of expectation of you, because, you hear a lot of times, and Eric, I'd be curious your input on this. Ben and I obviously talk to parents and families all the time, and one of the biggest things that they say, well, isn't it kind of a waste of time if they don't want it? And my response to them is, well, listen, like, not many people, when they go into the doctor's office and they are diagnosed with, diabetes or something, nobody really wants to hear that they have to cut out sugar, garbage food, they have to exercise, they have to eat right. Nobody really wants to, And so when somebody comes into treatment for the first time, it's not uncommon for them to not want it. I mean, you're removing something that is a big identity for them over the past X amount of years. So they're not going to come into treatment, like what Ben says all the time. It's not always rainbows and Red Bull, They're not like, woohoo, I'm going to treatment. I'm going to change my life. But when they do enter into the treatment process, I do explain to them. So as long as they're surrounded by people that they are all cut from the same cloth per se. They all have a lot of the same issues and they all have the same end goal in mind, which is sobriety. Your loved one will probably fall in line organically. And I say it all the time. You show me your friends, I'll show you your future. If you go into a facility where people there genuinely want to stay clean, they want to stay sober, if you're on the fence, you're going to fall to the side of wanting to stay clean and wanting to stay sober. Now, if you go into a facility that's full of a bunch of jackasses that don't want to be clean and sober, and you're on the fence, you're going to fall on that side. What's your thoughts on that?
So as far as the willingness and, structure and things like that, I mean, what it falls back to with someone, especially when I'm speaking to a family about, someone who is obviously has substance abuse disorder, like they need to be treated. I kind of give them their options. We could go about and get them set up here and get them in a bed and do all these things. And I said, or, how long are they going to be able to sustain what they're doing? Think about it like that. Like, some of my more candid conversations with families, if it be on less of a professional when I'm not clocked in, but when it's just me as a human being in recovery myself, I said, the alternative are funeral costs. To be like, whenever there's like a bad case where it's like a chronic relapse or a chronic overdoser, where it's just like this horrendous situation, I was like, the time is now to act. You and I didn't get on the phone by just happenstance. It's time to act. And as far as being in a facility with those, it doesn't, being treated, is such a huge term. Like, I'm being treated with care and like clinical backgrounds, and like, you mean to tell me there is a building full of people who are just trying to help me? How can that be a bad thing? Regardless, I mean, even if they get a little bit out of it, I mean, that's better than we were at. Anything is better than, this hopeless state of mind and homelessness and unemployment and all these other like negative consequences that addiction will bring. So, I mean, even if the person is, resistant, if they have reservations, if they have all of these things, that's, where you want to vet a facility and say, you know what? I don't have a license to treat this. I love him too much. That's my son. I'm like, I may love him to death, but the clinical director at that facility is not going to love him to death. They are going to go through various modes of psychological treatment and like really try to make an impact for him. I'm a huge proponent of treatment. You can get sober any way you want to, but it's a good track to take if it's possible for your loved one.
I think for those that have the opportunities, absolutely, it's a no-brainer. And it's crazy because you get a lot of times you could have all the resources in the world, but people will still argue the fact as to why it's not a good idea. Well, why'd you call me in the first place? Why are we on the phone? If everything that I say and suggest, and, I'm willing to listen, but you're going to tell me the exact reasons as to why you don't think that this is going to work, then why are we on the phone? And I can't believe how many times that happens. I like what you said. We didn't just get on the phone by chance here. Like, you picked it up, you dialed the number, you're on the phone with me. Now you're either going to listen or you're not. And it's frustrating. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I just want to hang up, and you can't, you gotta, it'll be okay. Well, maybe. Yeah, but also what you said too, like, the alternative is funeral costs. And that's the reality of it now. Especially, I wouldn't know what percentage to put on it, but I would say out of every 100 calls that we take, 90 of those calls are fentanyl, heroin. Fentanyl is in the picture somehow. You get the alcoholics, of course, and the benzo, but you can't even do a benzo now without wondering if it's cut up with fentanyl. Same with cocaine. You can't go out and do a line of cocaine anymore without worrying about overdosing on fentanyl. So that is a real possibility now. What it says in the big book, go and try and do some controlled drinking. That it's not a fair statement to make anymore because people take that to heart. And, I don't know how many people in your 4 years of sobriety that you've heard or known personally that's died. But for Ben and I, over 12 years, I don't even know. I don't know if it's safe to say in the hundreds, probably, 100 maybe.
I can't even keep track of it.
Yeah.
It's sad.
Yeah.
I want to point something out real quick. A real big picture way to look at this. Listen to Eric's story, where he was in 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
On death's door, criminal charges, kicked out of college, just your upbringing, all that. Where he's at today, night and day difference. Getting married, building a house, moving to the west coast of Florida, has a job, holds a job that he's happy with, that he enjoys doing. There's not even a glimmer of the old Eric that we met on day one. You're like a completely different human being in 4 years. And you referenced the part of the big book that says we have opportunity to recreate our lives. Did you ever imagine being where you're at today, doing the things you're doing, accomplishing what you've accomplished in 4 short years?
No, not at all. I mean, maybe like a late model BMW, you know? Certainly not, you know, like the opportunity to like have, you know, a family and a life and, you know, like all these different things. I hear it all the time, but it's very true for me. You know, if I would have held myself to like the list of things that I wanted 4 years ago, I would have sold myself short by just like leaps and bounds. You know, it's such a drastic change in perspective and just reality, you know, and to be in a position to where like you see other people living in such a different reality.
I want to hit home the old adage. This is such cliche AA. If you're listening to this podcast and you want what he has, do what he did. And here's where I'm going with that. Like, we've had the opportunity, Tom and I, to watch Eric go through this process beginning to end. He did everything that he was asked of him in the treatment process, inclusive of working 12 steps, inclusive of getting a sponsor, getting a sponsorship family, having a home group, still keeping up with that today. Like the maintenance that he's done for his recovery continues. I know his sponsor today, and he has a phenomenal sponsor. He may or may not be one of our group facilitators here, you know, but the point is like Eric has done all this work. It didn't come to him for free, but I'll ask you this. Is it way easier than it was?
Tremendously easier. Just, it's truly night and day. Because whenever you know, I was even sharing, because we have like a closed sponsorship family group that we do on Thursday nights. We rent out a room in a church. There's so many of us now. But the only way you can attend that group if you're sponsored by somebody in the family. There's over 20 of us in the room. And my share, you know, I planted seeds early in my recovery. And, you know, whether that be, you know, career, you know, therapy seeds, self-development, you know, all these different things that I said, I'd like to do that. And over the years, I've watered these seeds. I didn't rush the process or anything like that, but all of a sudden there's trees planting around me. And I'm, you know, a little bit in awe, but that just like, I know it's a testament to the program. Because like when I wake up every morning, like my life isn't a drag. I don't necessarily have like, you know, some $4 million condo on Miami Beach or something like that, something crazy. But I have like a sustainable and happy life. And I feel like that's really what we want, you know, as, you know, when I look at my parents, you know, that's all they wanted when they took me in. They just wanted me to be happy. And they saw me so miserable. Like they saw this kid who's like running wild and miserable. And that's all they ever wanted for me is, you know, to be happy, to be healthy, to like not be miserable anymore. And know that my day to day, I'm not a liability to society anymore. Because for a good amount of my time, I would have considered myself a liability. Like you take me out somewhere, God forbid there's a bar, you know, like an open bar wedding, just a terrible idea to bring me there. Like things like that, I'm no longer a liability. And that's just such a blessing.
I've gotten thrown out of my share of weddings. I was in a wedding, and then after the wedding, got into a fist fight with the groom. Me and all of us groomsmen. It was not good. It was open bar. We started flipping tables and stuff. It wasn't.
I was legit. I can't even think of a wedding I was ever invited to.
Well, because you
In
were
my
a
active
junkie.
addiction.
You were a junkie. You know. I mean, Eric and I we're garden variety drunks. You know. But
True.
I just wanted to touch real quick on one other thing before we wrap up. The mental health piece of it. You obviously shared a lot about mental health being a part of your story. Where do kind of things fall with that now, and how do you feel like your sobriety's impacted your mental health?
So I've had a couple of sponsees that are also dual diagnosis who are diagnosed with chronic mental health conditions. Pretty, light compared to, major psychotic disorders. But I always say that I had a fire in my head. And, it was more so about like this, maybe like a campfire or a backyard fire. And that was my mental illness. And then, I've been medicated since I was 7 years old. As a side note, with antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications. And then as I grew and grew and grew and then grew into drugs and things like that, it was like pouring gasoline on a fire, and it's completely uncontrollable. I have what a diagnosis code would say bipolar disorder 2, where I have more periods of heavy depression. I still have episodes of mania. There's controversy about bipolar 1, bipolar 2. But what I had to understand was that I can't manage this on my own. I have a neurological condition to where the neurotransmitters in my mind do not work the same way as others. And with medication management, different types of therapy, today I have a psychiatrist who is in network with my insurance. I have a primary therapist that's in network with my insurance that I see. I've had periods of time where I saw, it's Paige. All those years ago, my therapist that I had at Rock, I'm still able to see her years down the road. That's crazy, but she knows my whole story, and it's very easy to work with her. I don't have to go every week or things like that, but it's important to, be counseled and to have a professional say, you're doing all right. Here are some tips and some strategies I'd like you to use and I'd like you to implement into your life that will benefit not only your mental health, but your recovery. Without my mental health being managed appropriately, my recovery would not be where it is today. Period, point blank, no argument. I think that is a huge, huge component of somebody's story. You can't forget that you're different, but you're not special. That's what I always say to sponsees and people in the rooms and stuff. Like, don't forget that, and don't forget to get outside help. That's a huge part. I've been a guinea pig over the years. I mean, from 7 to 28, imagine the prescriptions I've taken, with bipolar disorder and depression and PTSD and things like that. But it's very manageable today. I've done my fair share of weekly counseling. I can't even count the thousands of hours I've spent in therapy, which is, helped me deal with things of the past, things of the future, daily activities, things like that. And I know what was really hard for me. I got my diagnosis when I was 18 years old. And God, that was hard. I fought it and I fought it. And there were periods of time where I was like medicated and I was a zombie. Because my psychiatrist thought it was a good idea to, you need 1 milligram of Xanax a day to help your anxiety. All the while I'm drinking like a fish. Who thought that was a good idea? So I had a great deal of education, like about pharmaceuticals, and that it's not appropriate for an alcoholic or a drug addict to take controlled medications. Mind and mood altering substances simply don't work for me. What does work for me are mood stabilizers that are controlled by a psychiatrist, not by a primary care physician. They shouldn't be in the business of writing psychiatric medications. Atypical antipsychotics. I'm bipolar. I have a psychotic condition. Low dosage, things like that. Antidepressant. If you have like a combination effect of, if you work with a psychiatrist, and when I say work, I mean like you give honest feedback about how you're feeling and the reactions that you're having. It's not a game where you show up to a doctor's office and you say, medicate me, I want to feel better. So that's not realistic. If you actually put in the work for your mental health like you do for your recovery, you'll see great things. But both have to be managed, and sometimes on different planes. I have, a great benefit to have, a licensed therapist in my sponsorship family. But I also have the independent responsibility that I have to take care of my mental health. Whether it's holistic, whether it's pharmaceutical, whether it's a lot of different things. But I certainly can't forget about that. And if you're one of my sponsees, I let you know that.
I think that's a good way of explaining it. I mean, and you hear a lot of times, I've heard this from quite a few sponsors, not sponsors of myself, but, they'll often say, well, if you just do the 12 steps, all this stuff will kind of go away. You hear this a lot, treatment. A lot of sponsors, and I hate to say it, but a lot of sponsors out there hold the impression or the opinion of you don't need to go to treatment. All you need to do is go to meetings and work the steps with me and yada, yada, yada. And although that is true for some, it's not true for the vast majority, and I find that it's true for those that don't have, when your back's put up against a wall long and hard enough, hopefully you can stumble into a meeting and get it, but it's way too risky, and a lot of people have the opportunities to go into treatment. May not be a private treatment center such as Rock or a Banyan, but there's other places out there that you can go, to get the help that you need. And I agree with you. The mental health component is, we're not anti-meds. We're not anti-mental health, disorders, stuff like that. I think, like you said, it's, oftentimes it needs to be treated on a different plane, and because I've seen it in my own life, from somebody dear to me, that struggles with mental health disorder and can be sober, but goes off the handle, and doesn't pick up, doesn't drink, doesn't use any drugs, but still ends up in the psych ward. Mm-hmm. And that's not a fun place to be either, so, Ben, I guess
I'm with Tom on that one. Like, it drives me crazy when I hear about sponsors that say that stuff. I've literally seen stories of sponsors tell their sponsees to get off their mental health medications.
Yeah.
And then this person spirals out of control. I'm just going to throw it out there. Usually I say something is my opinion, but I think sponsors are dead wrong when they do that. And the whole, like, people don't need treatment. Bill W. went to treatment 3 times, founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, in the course of his 3rd treatment. It's where he met Dr. Silkworth. It's where a lot of this took off from. The other part, I reference this all the time, page 133 of the Big Book, literally says, God has provided this world with many fine doctors, psychiatrists, and medical professionals. And basically it encourages you to seek their help because some of the stuff falls outside the confines of Alcoholics Anonymous and 12 Steps. So it drives me nuts when I hear about that stuff because that's not the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's Joe Schmo sponsor who decided to make up his own rules and plans and playing God, basically. You know, it's I totally disagree with it. I'm with Eric on this one 100%. Like, mental health is definitely a part of this, and he specifically mentioned had to be worked on 2 different planes, and that is the case in many cases. Like Tom said, not all cases, but if you have to evaluate for yourself with having people help educate you, professionals, you know, guide you along the way, do the work, as you so eloquently put it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's very well said, for sure.
All right. Well, I think it's been an hour. Eric, anything else?
I think that's all, guys. I appreciate you having me on. It's always an honor and a privilege. You know, not everybody gets the opportunity or has the mindset to say, well, you know, like, my story may be good for somebody to hear. So I just encourage anybody, you know, if you or a loved one is, you know, if you have questions, if you have concerns, if you don't know which direction to go, there are people out there that can help. Whether you have benefits, money, insurance, you know, the agency I work for, these guys, you know, you call in, you know, we kind of assess what's going on. There are places out there, state funded, you know, different detoxes. There is a way to get help. I'm a huge, huge proponent of just picking up the phone call and figure it out. Because, you know, we live in the United States of America. There are resources out there. Do you have to drive to get to them sometimes? Sure. May you have to wait? Sure. But you know what? Like, the help is there. So, like, take advantage of the opportunities that we have. You know, if you guys are in a position to, you know, put somebody you love into a private treatment center, you know, if that's their story, you know, if that's going to get them help, don't hesitate, you know, because that's the last thing. You know, some people take responsibility as loved ones to, you know, all this burden, all this trouble and things like that. You know, just take the first step, pick up the phone. You know, if nothing else out of my message, you know, take that, you know, be proactive. You know, don't let this thing sit around and grow stronger. Whether it's your own addiction, whether it's a loved one's addiction, you know, help is just around the corner. And I'm going to say something that's stolen from somebody next to me.
Uh-oh.
I know what this is.
Because what's fascinating about this statement is that when I'm in different rooms around South Florida and I say this, they come up to me and say, oh, how do you know ... So if no one's told you they love you today, I do. Thank you for letting me share.
Well, would you look at that?
What do I say now?
I don't know.
Too, man.
Ben, any final thoughts?
No, happy 4 years, dude.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Been an honor to watch the journey.
For if you know, you were listening intently and you didn't pick up on it, Eric, you just did celebrate 4 years of continuous sobriety, nights and weekends included.
Indeed.
On September 27th,
2018.
So celebrated 4 years. Congratulations, dude. All right, that is it for this episode of Real Recovery Talk. Thank you for tuning in. Again, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns about your specific situation, like I said at the beginning of the show, you can always email myself, Tom, at realrecoverytalk.com and Ben at realrecoverytalk.com. Those emails are right there. All you have to do is type them in, send us an email, we'll get your phone number, we'll have a conversation, we'll see if we can get you some help. Until then, that is it. We will see y'all later.